We have been deceived. From childhood, we were fed beautiful fairy tales about the greatest achievements of the early 20th century. Stories of heroism, hard work, and brilliant engineering minds. But the moment you set aside those school textbooks and pick up a calculator, the entire magnificent picture crumbles into dust. We grew up gazing at black and white photographs of colossal ocean liners, trusting the captions in museums without question. But have you ever stopped to truly examine what you are seeing? Who actually built these massive structures that, even today, over a century later, still appear to be the pinnacle of technological progress? Why do scientists remain silent about the glaring inconsistencies in the numbers and timelines? Today, we will dismantle one of the greatest myths of the industrial age. We will peer beneath the hull of the legendary Titanic, but our focus will not be on icebergs or the romantic tragedy of Jack and Rose. We will examine cold, hard steel and mathematical impossibility. Our investigation centers on rivets. Yes, ordinary metal fasteners that held the giant's hull together. Official history claims there were 3 million of them, 3 million metal fingers gripping thousands of tons of steel. And we are told that every single one was driven by hand. Do you hear that sound? That is the sound of logic shattering. Let us journey back to Belfast in the early 20th century to the Harland and Wolff shipyard. We are told that construction was in full swing, with thousands of workers swarming like ants to create this ark. But let us engage our critical thinking. The official keel-laying date was March 31st, 1909. The ship was launched on May 31st, 1911. That gives us just over 2 years to assemble the main skeleton and cover it with steel plates, 790 days in total. Let us assume they worked without weekends, without holidays, without strikes, and without breaks for bad weather, which is already a fantasy for rainy Ireland. But let us be generous and keep that figure, 790 days, 3 million rivets. Take out your calculator right now. Divide 3 million by 790. The result is nearly 3,800 rivets per day. Every single day. And this was for just one ship, remember. The sister vessel Olympic was being constructed simultaneously, requiring identical resources and labor. Are you beginning to grasp the scale of the absurdity? To understand why this number is impossible, you must comprehend the technology of that era. Installing a single rivet was not like hammering a nail. It was an extremely complex team operation requiring surgical precision and tremendous physical strength. The process worked like this. First, a rivet had to be heated in a portable forge until white hot. The metal had to reach a critical temperature, plastic but not molten. A specialized heater boy was responsible for this. Then using tongs, he would remove the blazing piece of metal and throw it, yes, literally throw it through the air, to a catcher standing on scaffolding near the hull. The catcher had to catch this fiery projectile in a bucket or special cone without killing himself or anyone nearby. The rivet was then inserted into the hole, and only then did the riveter step in. 2 men with heavy sledgehammers would begin striking the protruding end to form the rivet head, while a third worker on the opposite side pressed his entire body weight against the support to prevent the rivet from flying back out. 4 men for 1 point. Their coordination had to be perfect. One missed strike, and the metal cooled. The rivet was ruined. It had to be drilled out by hand, wasting precious hours. Now imagine this assembly line in reality. 3,800 times per day, this crew had to perform this deadly dance with scorching metal. How long does one rivet take? Heating, throwing, positioning, hammering, cooling. Even assuming they were robots, a single quality rivet required a minimum of 4 to 5 minutes of grueling labor. There are only 1,440 minutes in a day. Even working around the clock, one crew could never accomplish this. Someone will say, there were many crews, hundreds of crews. But consider this, a ship's hull is not an endless field. It is a confined space. Workers had to stand on scaffolding, hang from ropes, and crawl into narrow compartments of the double bottom. You cannot put 5,000 people on one section of the hull. They would simply kill each other with their sledgehammers. The density of workstations has a physical limit. Furthermore, the quality of hand riveting cannot remain consistent. Human error is inevitable fatigue, a trembling hand, insufficiently heated metal. Yet when we examine photographs of the Titanic's or Olympics hull plating, we see perfect rows as if printed by a machine. The geometry of the lines is flawless. The rivet heads are identical down to the millimeter. Is this possible with manual labor, when hundreds of different workers with varying striking force are pounding on metal? Official history insists, yes, this is craftsmanship, but any metallurgical engineer will tell you this is a statistical anomaly. Achieving machine-level precision with the hands of thousands of semi-literate workers laboring in smoke, noise, and constant danger is simply impossible. Here lies the catch they are carefully hiding from us. They are trying to sell us the image of a heroic worker with a hammer, but this image falls apart the moment we start counting. 3 million strikes, millions of man-hours compressed into unrealistic timeframes. And we have not even discussed the weight of the hull plates themselves. Steel sheets weighing several tons each had to be lifted, perfectly aligned hole to hole, and fixed in place in the early 20th century when cranes were primitive and slow. How did they achieve such assembly precision that 3 million holes aligned perfectly? If holes in two plates were misaligned by even a millimeter, the rivet would not fit. It could not be forced in, the hole had to be re-drilled. That takes more time they did not have. Official shipyard reports are filled with payment records and worker counts, but these documents could be as fabricated as our entire chronology. Why are we not shown blueprints of tools capable of automating this process? Perhaps such tools did not officially exist because they belong to a different technological era. Look carefully at archival photographs of the Harland and Wolff shipyard. You see this cyclopean forest of steel surrounding the skeletal frames of future ocean liners. These are the aero gantry scaffolds. We are officially told this structure was erected specifically for the construction of the Olympic-class ships. But pause for a moment and consider what we are seeing. Before us stands an engineering structure that in its complexity and technological sophistication arguably surpasses the ships themselves. Nearly 230 feet tall, 850 feet long, with gigantic cranes, electric lifts, and movable platforms. All of this was allegedly built in the shortest possible time just to assemble a couple of ships. This is economically senseless unless this infrastructure was inherited from an era that historians prefer not to discuss. But let us return to our rivets, because the devil truly is in the details that destroy the official narrative. Shipbuilding historians, cornered by mathematics, reluctantly admit, yes, some rivets were installed by hydraulic machines. They call them Iron Men. These were enormous clamps suspended from cranes that compressed red-hot rivets using water pressure. You might think, there it is, the solution to the puzzle. Machines did all the work. But not so fast. Official technical documentation states that hydraulics were used only on the keel and some sections of the bottom. Why? Because these machines were unwieldy monsters weighing several tons. They physically could not reach the vertical sides, the curved plates of the stern or bow, and certainly not the internal bulkheads. The gap between the press jaws was limited, and the arm's reach did not allow work at height without a complex suspension system. Systems we do not observe in photographs of the mass operations. This means that 80 to 90% of the hull still required that same notorious hand labor, whose impossibility we have already demonstrated. Let us delve into the purely physical aspect. The thickness of the Titanic's hull plates reached approximately 1.5 inches, nearly 4 centimeters of alloyed steel. To join two such plates in an overlap and ensure watertightness required colossal force. A hand hammer strike, even from a strong man, impacts the surface locally and momentarily. The rivet metal cools in mere seconds. If you did not form the head and fill the hole with metal before the temperature dropped below the critical point, the rivet would contract improperly during cooling. It would not pull the plates together, a microgap would appear. For a submarine or a transatlantic liner, this is a death sentence before even touching water. Pressurized water will find a way through. Yet the Titanic was considered unsinkable precisely because of its assembly quality. How could a crowd of exhausted workers with sledgehammers achieve quality that today is accessible only to robotic production lines? Here we approach another glaring contradiction: logistics and human resources. Belfast in the early 20th century was an industrial city, but not an infinite one. To maintain the construction pace claimed in official reports, 15,000 people would have had to work at the shipyard simultaneously. 15,000 men of military age possessing high qualifications. Where did they live? Analysis of Belfast maps from that era does not reveal gigantic new residential developments built for this army of workers. Where is the infrastructure? Where are the canteens capable of feeding a legion? Where are the hospitals that should have been overflowing with people suffering injuries, burns, and occupational deafness? Imagine the acoustic impact of hundreds of hammers simultaneously striking a hollow metal hull that acts as a giant resonator. That is thousands of decibels. Without modern hearing protection, half the city should have gone deaf within a month. Yet medical archives show no spike in mass deafness in Belfast in 1910. Strange, is it not? As if these 15,000 people simply did not exist in our reality. And what if they truly did not exist? What if we are looking not at a construction process but at a restoration? View those old photographs from a different angle. We see people bustling around an enormous hull, but are they building it from scratch, or are they simply servicing, painting, and replacing individual components on something created long before them? This would explain both the absence of necessary worker infrastructure and the impossibility of hand riveting on such a scale. They did not drive 3 million rivets. Perhaps they only replaced a few thousand to put an ancient mechanism back into service. This resolves all mathematical contradictions. Now let us descend from the scaffolding where we left our fictional riveters and peer into the very belly of this Leviathan. If the mathematics of rivets raises doubts, the fuel logistics should absolutely blow your mind. The Titanic's official specifications state that its heart beat thanks to coal. 29 enormous boilers, 159 furnaces. To propel this behemoth at 20 knots, it had to consume over 600 tons of coal per day. 600 tons. Imagine a train of 10 heavily loaded freight cars. All of this had to be shoveled into the furnaces by hand. We are told that 176 men worked in the boiler rooms. Divide 600 tons by 176. Each stoker working in hell where air temperature reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit had to move nearly 3.5 tons of coal per shift. Not just move it, but distribute it evenly across the grates. This is biomechanical nonsense. Even the most trained human body would burn out on such work within a couple of days. The heart would give out. Yet we are told these men worked like this for entire voyages, year after year. Here we face the same paradox as with the rivets. The technical requirements exceed the physical capabilities of humans of that era. But what if coal was not the Titanic's original fuel? Look at the engine room schematics. They look like a chaotic jumble of pipes and boilers crammed into a space clearly designed for something else, something elegant, compact, and powerful. There exists a theory that we, having inherited these giant vessels from a previous civilization, simply could not activate their original reactors. We gutted the high-tech internals whose operating principles were beyond our comprehension, perhaps atmospheric electricity or the ether energy that Tesla and Mendeleev discussed before their work was edited. In place of this clean energy, we, like barbarians, installed primitive steam boilers, turning a noble ship into a giant smoking furnace. We forced it to run on wood and coal because that was our ceiling. This explains why the Titanic's funnels were so disproportionately enormous. The fourth funnel was entirely fake, as historians admit. Why was it there? For ventilation, or was it a remnant of an old system whose purpose we have forgotten? Now ascend to the upper decks, to the first-class salons. Notice this stark contrast. Below, hellish, filthy, impossible labor of stokers. Above, interiors worthy of Roman imperial palaces. Perfect oak carvings, enormous glass domes, mosaics, inlays. Who created this? The same people living in Belfast's dirty tenements? Where were the schools of masters capable of such delicate work on an industrial scale? We see here a collision of two worlds. The construction technology of the hull and interior finishing is centuries ahead of the operational technology. It is as if someone lit a campfire inside a spaceship to keep warm. We use artifacts of a great age like savages who found a smartphone and use it as a cutting board. Consider the steel plates themselves, their size and quality. In the early 20th century, metallurgy was certainly advancing, but producing rolled sheets of such area and perfect flatness is a challenge even for modern factories. The Titanic's plates, judging by photographs, were enormous. How were they transported? Railways of that era had dimensional limitations. Roads for horse-drawn transport had even stricter limits. We are shown carts with horses pulling anchors. But where are photographs of hundreds of tons of sheet metal being transported through city streets? They do not exist. Either the factories stood right at the shipyard, which they did not, or the logistics were accomplished in ways they forgot to tell us about. Or, I repeat, these sheets were never transported anywhere because they were already part of a structure standing there for centuries. Look around. The Titanic was not alone. At the same time, across the world from America to Australia stand allegedly newly constructed grand buildings, train stations, libraries, capitals, all executed in a unified classical style with giant doors, columns, and domes. And for each one, we are told the same story, built in 2 years, with picks and shovels, stone hauled by horses. Do you sense the pattern? The Titanic is a floating cathedral from that same era. It is part of a unified global infrastructure inherited after some catastrophe that occurred in the 19th century. We call it the Victorian era, but perhaps it was an era of looting. We settled empty cities, started up surviving factories, somehow got the boilers going on the great ships, and called it industrialization. We are a cargo cult civilization. We worship blueprints we do not understand and imitate the actions of the gods who live before us. Now that we have recognized the impossibility of construction and the absurdity of operating these giants, it is time to ask the most terrifying question. Why were they in such a hurry to dispose of these ships? The story of the Titanic's demise is not simply a series of tragic accidents. It was a planned operation to destroy evidence that could have revealed our true origins. Recall the story of the Olympic, the Titanic's elder sibling. A year before the disaster, the Olympic collided with the cruiser HMS Hawke and sustained an enormous breach. The engineer's verdict: the Olympic was at fault. Insurance refused payment. The company suffered colossal losses, but instead of repairing the vessel, they made strange maneuvers. There is a popular theory about switching the ships, but let us view it through the lens of lost technology. What if we physically could not repair the Olympic? What if the hull alloy created by an ancient civilization was so complex in composition that our primitive 1910 steel patches simply would not hold? We faced a situation where natives tried to repair a space shuttle with clay and sticks. We did not possess the welding or molecular bonding technology originally used. We could only drill holes and insert our crude rivets, compromising the structural integrity. The damaged Olympic became a useless hunk of metal, impossible to restore. And so a decision was made to send it to the bottom disguised as the brand new Titanic, collecting insurance and, more importantly, hiding the evidence. This was a cover-up operation for our technological helplessness. We did not build these ships, we wore them out. And when they broke, we sank them because repairs were beyond our comprehension. Look at the nature of the Titanic's damage, the hull fracture. We are officially told the steel was brittle due to sulfur impurities. Another convenient lie: the steel was not brittle. It was different. It was designed for other loads and another environment, perhaps an etheric environment about which we know nothing. Exposure to our dense, aggressive atmosphere and water made this metal vulnerable, like a fish pulled onto land. The Titanic's sinking became a symbolic farewell to the age of giants. It was a sacrifice marking the transition to a new, simplified reality, a world of plastic, concrete, and cheap imitations. A world where knowledge is replaced by instructions and history by propaganda. Those at the helm of this conspiracy call them the world government. The predictors, or the priests, knew exactly what they were doing. They needed to erase the memory of past greatness. As long as artifacts like the Titanic existed, people could ask questions, could make comparisons. And the comparison was not in favor of the new authorities. So the giants had to go tragically, loudly, so that fear of the elements would paralyze any will to seek the truth. The catastrophe was inevitable, not because of an iceberg, but because of technological incompatibility. We tried to operate a time machine with a wrench. When it exploded, we invented a beautiful story of love and death to hide our insignificance. We live on ruins we did not bother to study properly before starting to destroy. The Titanic lies on the ocean floor not as a monument to human recklessness, but as a time capsule holding secrets of metallurgy and engineering that we have lost. Every time submarines descend to it, we are shown only what can be shown: boots, dishes, the captain's bathtub. But they never show us cross-sections of the metal at fracture points under a microscope. They never show us the seabed beneath the silt, where engine parts might lie, parts whose operating principles would overturn physics. Because if we learn the truth about the Titanic, the entire house of cards of our history collapses. We would understand that we are not the pinnacle of evolution, but the degraded remnants of something far greater. The numbers cry out about this. Mathematics cannot lie, unlike historians rewriting textbooks at the victor's dictation. The rivets of the Titanic are not just fasteners, they are nails in the coffin of the official version of history, and the more closely we examine the metal, the more clearly the traces of an entirely different civilization emerge, a civilization that operated with different energies and different scales.